We've been talking about recession fears and worrying about major businesses going under. Well, now, sadly, a major supplier to Australia's supermarkets has gone into receivership. 1,500 jobs are at risk. It's one of the country's biggest trucking companies, Scott's Refrigerated Logistics. It supplies Woolworths, Coles, IGA and Aldi. The Australian reports that while groceries will still be delivered to supermarkets, this could be at risk if a rescue deal isn't hatched. According to business reporter Jared Lynch, this is a sign the RBA rates are starting to hurt companies. It is expected Scott's collapse will be one of many this year as the Reserve Bank's 9 consecutive interest rate hikes begin to bite, the Australian reports. Now, the RBA has to be careful. It's walking a fine line between plunging businesses into distress and taking the heat out of inflation. Shark Tank star Robert Herjavec told me last night he's concerned the US Reserve Bank has been raising rates too aggressively, and it's a pattern that Australia has followed.
There's two parts to Australia. It's an incredible place to live, but the minimum wage is very high. The cost of living here is incredibly high. Food prices are really high. So I think for the average consumer, when interest rates keep going up, it's going to be very, very challenging.
In the United States, inflation data is higher than expected, and it's having an impact here. Creditor Watch says trade payment defaults are up 39% year on year, with the year only getting, and it's only going to get more difficult for families. The agency says the RBA rates rises, along with labour shortages and supply chain issues, are all starting to have a major impact. The Albanese government's confidence that we'll avoid recession isn't matched by business leaders. Coles Chief Executive Stephen Kane told the Fin Review this week that as fixed mortgages end and power bills rise, he said the result will be reduced discretionary expenditure in the first instance. A2 Milk CEO David Bortolussi also told the Fin that there will definitely be a slowdown. He says, "I hope we don't slip into recession, but it's quite possible." Treasurer Jim Chalmers says it's going to be a tough year ahead, and he says there will be a slowdown, but he expects at this point that Australia will avoid a recession. That is if the RBA manages to get the balance right between reining in inflation and not crushing the economy. The RBA has warned, though, that we are still facing multiple rate rises. Are you still confident we won't go into recession this year?
Yeah, it's definitely my expectation, based on what we know now, that Australia won't head into recession. The people that prepare the government's forecasts are not expecting that outcome, nor is the Reserve Bank. But we need to be upfront with people and explain to them that we expect the economy will slow considerably in the course of this year. We are facing a number of really significant headwinds, higher interest rates. The global economy is in a difficult position right now, and we won't be completely immune from that. So we expect our economy to slow. We don't expect it to go...
But not to the point of recession.
We don't expect it to go into recession.
Joining me now, the Australian newspaper's Washington correspondent, Adam Creighton. Adam, thanks for joining me. Look, do you think the US will go into a recession, and what about Australia?
Well, certainly there's been lots of doom and gloom over here, Sharri, that's for sure. I mean, the cash rate, the interest rate here, if you like, has gone from basically 0 to 4.75% in about 12 months. That's a very rapid increase. So, of course, lots of economists, just like back home, have been saying that the US is going to fall into recession. But it has to be said, the economy has proved remarkably resilient so far. We've still got a jobless rate here in the US of 3.4%, which is the lowest, I think, since 1969. And consumer spending, just like back home, has also been very strong. So I think the economy has definitely surprised on the upside. There was a survey here of the top economists in the US that came out just yesterday, and about 60% of them, 60% of I think 48 economists, think that there's more than a 50% chance of a recession in the US in the next 12 months. Now, that's not as bad as what they forecast a few months ago. So I think there's probably a slight move toward optimism. And, what can we learn about that for Australia? Well, Australia seems to be about 6 to 9 months behind the US. And so I suppose you'd probably say good news that Australia might not go into recession, just as the Treasurer said. But then again, Australia has a different financial structure. Many more home buyers have a variable rate interest. mortgages. So that means, of course, when the cash rate goes up, that it affects them. That affects their disposable income immediately.
And those who are unfixed, unfixed mortgages will be coming off those in the next few months. Many people will. Now, Adam, you would have heard just then that Robert Herjavec said that he thinks the central bank in the United States has been too aggressive raising rates. What's your view on that? And again, the RBA Governor Philip Lowe here.
Well, look, I mean, I think, I'd probably slightly agree with him. I mean, central banks have this one theory that they can control the rate of inflation with their short-term interest rate. And everyone tends to think that that is true, but there's actually not much evidence for it. It's a theory. It's not, it's not an empirical fact. And so the US Federal Reserve is looking here at inflation of 6.4% for the 12 months to January. That's, of course, more than 3 times what their target is. And so they're compelled, really, to keep raising interest rates. The cash rate target here right now is 4.75%, so quite a bit more than Australia. And it's forecast to go to 5.25 in the next 6 months. So that's a fairly hefty cash rate.
Yes.
Now, if the rate of inflation does not keep falling, then they're probably going to keep lifting. And at some point, that almost has to cause a recession. I mean, if you look at the 16 or so times since the Second World War when the Federal Reserve has tried to kill inflation, with increased interest rates, that normally leads to a recession in almost every case.